The corruption in renewable energies is exploding and the Forestalia case is getting out of control. Let's begin. Hello and welcome to a new edition of Precautionary Measures with Miguel Angel Perez. Today we are going to address a corruption case that directly affects renewable energies and has a name, the Forestalia case. Pay attention because everything being investigated in this case is getting out of hand, and there are also several ongoing investigations in different courts. We are going to analyze what is happening and what could be, pay attention, the immediate future of this corruption investigation in renewable energies. Because the government talks a lot about the need to implement renewable energies. And pay attention because right now all the corruption behind the wind turbines, the photovoltaic plants, etc. is being uncovered. In short, a whole universe of corruption that the civil guard is now focusing on, and we'll see what they can uncover. So take note of these different ongoing investigations and stay until the end of the video. We're going to bring you all the first-hand information about this, and now we can talk about corruption. Pay attention and share this information as we always do on screen so you can follow it from home in much more detail. Here we have the president of the company Forestalia, Fernando Samper, who honestly doesn't look like he's among very good friends. That was when he had to go to court because he has actually been arrested in recent days. Well, the investigation of the Forestalia case, attention, could be fully taken over by the National Court in a major corruption case. This renewable energy company, headquartered in Zaragoza and with a presence in Madrid, is currently facing two main investigations. The first case broke out in December as part of the so-called Operation Leire and is being investigated by the Central Operational Unit of the Civil Guard. The head of the Central Investigative Court No. 5 of the National Court, Santiago Pedras. On one hand, and on the other hand, there's the second case, pay attention, for alleged crimes of administrative and environmental misconduct, bribery, money laundering, or belonging to a criminal organization. It was triggered a few days ago in the Investigative Court No. 1 of Teruel. The investigation of this case is led by the Central Operational Environmental Unit of the Civil Guard, known as UCOMA. Okay, so it's not the UCO, it's the UCOMA. Well, according to what we've learned, in digital freedom and precautionary measures, the investigation of Forestalia in both cases is getting out of hand. And it is not ruled out that all the alleged criminal acts being investigated in both cases may end up being centralized in the investigation of a single unit, a major corruption case. At the National Court, they tell us that many contracts and suspicious awards are being analyzed. Both investigations into the company, they tell us, are still in their early stages and need to develop further. The final decision on the direction of the investigation could end up at the National Court, as we've said. Or, alternatively, the National Court could transfer its whole investigation to the Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel. Those are the two options. However, the sources we've consulted emphasize that the most likely option is for the National Court to centralize the investigation, since in Teruel they're even investigating a possible crime of criminal organization. This would clearly fall under the National Court's jurisdiction. In the same way, it should be decided whether the investigation ends up being fully transferred to the Central Operative Unit of the Civil Guard, UCO, or to the Central Operative Unit of the Civil Guard, known as UCOMA. That is, this still has to be decided, just like the investigation, since one of them just broke out in December and the other just a few days ago. These are still decisions that have to be made, right, by the judges and by the investigators. See if it ends up in the National Court or Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel and whether it's investigated by the UCO or UCO UCOMA, okay? Those are the two parts, let's say, that have to be decided, and now let's move on to the parts that are being investigated. The first one, the investigation into Forestalia in Teruel. This investigation is being carried out by the Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel. It focuses on alleged irregularities in the processing of numerous renewable energy projects, such as wind and photovoltaic parks, especially in the province of Teruel in Aragon, including the macro project Cluster del Maestrazgo, one of the largest local wind farms. In other words, what is being investigated is of great magnitude. Last week, as Libertad Digital had reported, the president of Forestalia, Fernando Sanchez Rivas, was arrested as part of this case. In this operation, up to 12 searches were carried out, and in addition to the arrest of Sanchez, 5 other people were brought before the court. Among them was also, attention, the former high-ranking official of the Ministry for the Ecological Transition, which was headed in Teruel by Teresa Rivera, Eugenio Dominguez, and a notary. In other words, another case that also implicates the former vice president of Pedro Sanchez's government, Teresa Rivera. This scheme then, according to the information we have so far, would cover at least 52 projects linked to deficiencies in environmental impact studies and possible irregularities in awards and outsourcing. The case is under a gag order in the Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel, and further arrests or even more people being implicated are not ruled out. This investigation into Forestalia is being conducted in the Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel. But, as I was saying, there is also another investigation that was opened a few months earlier in the National Court itself, specifically in the Central Court of Instruction No. 5, which is headed by Santiago Pedras. And this investigation into Forestalia is part of what is known as Operation Leire. You know, the Socialist Party's fixer, just so we're clear, this blew up at the end in Badajoz. In this case, alleged irregularities in public contracts related to CEPI and other companies are being investigated. In December 2025, the UCO searched Forestalia's headquarters in Zaragoza and also in Madrid. The investigation focuses on determining the connection of this renewable energy company with the alleged corruption scheme involving public awards, illegal commissions, and rigging of contracts in other public entities. For example, the one I mentioned to you, CEPI, the State Industrial Holdings Company. In the context of this case, former PSOE member and socialist insider Leire was arrested. Also, the former president of CEPI, Vicente Fernandez, and the owner of the company Servinavar, already well known in the Coldo scheme, and alleged partner of Santos Cerdán, who is also the well-known Anchón Alonso. It should be noted that all three, Leire Díez, Vicente Fernandez, and Anchón Alonso, were released on provisional liberty after testifying before the judge, since the prosecutor's office surprisingly did not request provisional detention. We discussed this at the time in precautionary measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez, since the UCO arrested them. By order of the judge, the duty judge at that time from the National Court, Magistrate Antonio Piña, saw a risk of destruction of evidence, which is why all three were arrested, Leire Díez, Vicente Fernandez, and Anchón Alonso. And then, however, in the hearing on precautionary measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez, the prosecutor's office, surprisingly, did not see the risk of flight that the UCO and the judge had previously seen, and did not request provisional detention. This meant that, since it was the only prosecution present in this case, there were no popular accusations, no private parties involved, and so on. The three detainees had to be released. And that's how things are right now, since this major case has already changed, although the investigation is still ongoing through different channels, but everything seems to indicate that it will end up being centralized. Of course, as I have told you, what would make the most sense is for all these environmental corruption investigations to end up being centralized in the National Court. If we're dealing with an alleged criminal organization, the National Court clearly has more resources and authority to investigate than the Court of Instruction No. 1 of Teruel. As I said, these investigations are still ongoing, even regarding some days and others just 3 months ago barely. So, it's still a decision that has to be made, just like it also has to be decided. Well, in the end, it's also related to this. Which police unit is investigating it? It could be the Central Operative Unit of the Civil Guard or the Central Operative Environmental Unit known as UCOMA. Anyway, any updates regarding this investigation, this almost macro case of environmental corruption focusing on the company Forestalia, I will keep telling you about them as always, here. On Precautionary Measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez, that's it for this edition of Precautionary Measures with Miguel Ángel Pérez. I hope you liked the information I shared with you today, and you already know that you can become a member. Members like the chosen ones for less than €3 a month, or like the supreme ones for less than €7 a month. I think we're already at 105 members, which is amazing. Really, thank you so much. We've already surpassed 100 members. Thank you for your support, your encouraging messages. You can also make your financial contributions, each one as much as they can and when they can, to 627556370 via Bizum, 627556370. The most important thing, as I always say, is that this information reaches everyone because information is power. See you soon.